Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Bob Kincaid, thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday. It is the 16th day of December in the year 2014. We are within 10 days of Christmas, 9 days from today, a week from Thursday. We're coming fast, and I want to welcome you to the Virtual Center today, and tell you how much we appreciate your willingness to give us a portion of your valuable time, your increasingly valuable time, because obviously in today's world that's probably the commodity that we have too little of, which is time. And of course, as I get older, that becomes a little bit more meaningful than it ever was before. And I think some of you, hopefully, there's somebody out there that's old enough to have those same feelings about time. I want to welcome you to the program. I want to invite you to participate in today's program. First of all, I think I'd like to apologize. In a way, I guess, for missing yesterday's program. I want to explain why I was unable to do a program yesterday, because it was totally selfish on my part. But on the other hand, it turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful day for me. Because of a number of things associated with my own personal life, my wife is adjusting to a new job, which she's had for about 6 weeks now. She's actually working 2 part-time jobs, which together make for a little bit more than a normal full-time job. And this weekend we had a granddaughter staying with us for the weekend who was involved in a number of Christmas performances at her high school. And so my wife spent Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday attending her performances because she feels, and I agree with her, that the more support we can give this particular granddaughter, the better. So the reality of the situation was that my wife and I haven't seen each other too much other than passing in the night, so to speak, for 5 or 6 days. And yesterday, my wife had rearranged her schedule, her work schedule, in such a way that she could free up yesterday, Monday afternoon, for a doctor's appointment, which I was encouraging her to do because for a number of years she's not had a personal physician, and I think she may have one now. And so I was really anxious that she set up this appointment, and it was yesterday afternoon. So the reality is that yesterday afternoon, at the time we do the Virtual Center, she was between appointments, if I can explain. She had an appointment to have her car worked on yesterday morning. It was a recall. And she had to bring that in at 10 a.m. yesterday morning, and then she had the doctor's appointment scheduled at 3. So she walked in the house about 45 minutes before we were scheduled to begin our program here at the Virtual Center. And she said, "Oh, I forgot about the program. I was hoping that we could take advantage of the 2.5 hours I have before the appointment and do lunch." And I thought, I think I really need to do that. So I called Bob, and Bob was gracious enough to understand. And So consequently, we kind of bailed on yesterday's program. And I think the more I thought about it, how much I enjoyed that lunch and how much I enjoyed those couple of hours that I was able to spend with her. And I really thought it was kind of worthwhile and kind of justified. I hope you'll agree. But it's not that I didn't miss the virtual center. I was ready to go. And I'm hoping that I'm equally ready to go today, but we'll find that out. We never know until it happens. Sometimes the best laid plans, as the expression goes, and you know what I mean. And then other times, when you're really not sure how it's going to go at all, sometimes those tend to be the most successful. So it's a little bit difficult to know. But what would make our program today even more meaningful is if we, all of us, myself and those tuned in, had an opportunity to hear from you. If you have ideas or you have questions or concerns or thoughts on some of the issues that we're dealing with or we've been dealing with, we would love to hear from you. And I hope, as you may recall, our last program, last time together, which was last Wednesday, we did have a call. We did have a caller. And it just made it was the highlight of the week for me. It was wonderful to have that kind of interaction. In Bob's introduction, he refers to the virtual center as an ongoing conversation. And of course, as most of us are aware, a conversation really calls for more than one person. It's a dialogue, not a monologue. And so I want to invite you, if you are so inclined, to feel comfortable to call and share your thoughts and your concerns and your ideas, your suggestions with our listeners. I think they would love to hear from you. I know that I would as well. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N. If you would like to email me directly, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W-A-O'Brien, B-R-I-E-N, 906. No punctuation, all one word, at gmail.com. There are so many issues that seem to warrant attention that it creates a little bit of a concern. It's not what to do, it's what to postpone or what not to do that becomes sometimes the most difficult issue here at the virtual center, especially as we move much more actively into the holiday season. Bob and I were talking about what kind of a holiday schedule over Christmas and New Year's we'll be maintaining here at the virtual center. I'm going to be traveling for Christmas, and so I think next week it looks like we'll be doing the program on Monday and then and not on Tuesday and Wednesday. But the following week, New Year's week, I think I plan to be here for the whole week, and so I could do just our regular schedule on New Year's week, but we'll see. I don't know what it would be like to do a program on the day before New Year's. Maybe we could find out. But anyway, there are a number of issues that I'd like to deal with. I hope you bear with me because some of them are clearly directly related to the mission of the virtual center. Some of them are only indirectly related or a little bit more intricately connected, if you will, to the mission of the virtual center. And of course, if we look at contemporary affairs, contemporary issues, it's so difficult sometimes to not become involved in contemporary affairs and current issues of the day. But at the same time, my reluctance to do that is pretty much driven by the mission of the virtual center. I'm concerned that once we begin to devote more and more of our time into contemporary affairs, we will really lose touch with the 18th century and with the founders and with what the founders intended. And I don't want to do that. So, it's very, very difficult. I mean, we had a horrendous raid in Pakistan yesterday in which 126 human beings, mostly children, were slaughtered by the Taliban. We had the standoff, which ended with 3 deaths in Sydney, Australia, which just ended yesterday, I believe. We have a number of things, and of course there are so many issues and so much we could talk about related to those as they directly or indirectly relate to the mission of the virtual center. One of the just a thought on that before we move on. The one thing that I've been thinking of, especially with the situation with terrorism in the world, of course we had the report come out about our own terrorist experience, Dick Cheney notwithstanding. I think terrorism is terrorism. I think John McCain pretty well nailed that down on Sunday. But it seems to me that what we're moving into is a phase of world history which seems to call on forces or the introduction of creative approaches to some of the world's problems that we haven't tried before. And specifically what I've been thinking about is the United Nations. And the more I see this, and the more we bat the issue of terrorism back and forth, and we're talking about the slaughter of innocents, wherever it applies, the drone strikes that we have engaged in, and while they are, while the precision of the drones is incredible scientifically, the fact of the matter is, as we know, there are all sorts of civilian casualties and civilian deaths and the maiming of civilians associated with it. And so it's a back and forth kind of thing that seems to me that we have a worldwide crisis. And I think it's based on a lack of respect for humanity. I think there is a deficit, if you will, in appreciation for the value of humanity on all sides. I think we've seen it in this country, obviously, with the situation with the police and the way certain people are being mistreated by the police. We have the Michael Brown situation. We have the Garner situation in New York. We have a number of demonstrations. Then we have the situation with the Taliban. We have the situation going on in Syria and the suspected use of chemical weapons and the inability of nations to really know how to deal with that. It seems to me that we are moving into a situation where worldwide crisis and worldwide problems require worldwide solutions. We have an international organization called the United Nations. As we know, it's become almost invisible in some of these areas. I think part of the reason for that is because a lot of people have found it to their advantage to criticize and attack and to demean the United Nations. In effect, what these attacks have done is disarm the very agency that might provide some hope. Because I think as individual nations engage in this kind of thing, it becomes a back and forth, tit-for-tat kind of situation, which really doesn't produce solutions. It merely escalates the problems. I think the mentality revealed this past weekend by Dick Cheney in defending the behavior, the CIA behavior in Guantanamo and some of these dark sites that the CIA maintained around the world seems to me to suggest that individuals, for whatever reason, can find ways to rationalize some pretty despicable behavior. And I think one of the most, one of the easiest ways to do that is to look at the other side and basically say, well, no matter what we're doing, it's not as bad as what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was particularly struck by the Taliban's announcement in response to the slaughter of little children. That in effect, this was their effort to respond. I would suggest to you that what we did in terrorism was our effort to respond. I think what we have to do is somehow take the ball away from those whose priority is to respond and give the ball to somebody whose priority is to solve, is to find ways to solve some of these issues. I think the problem relates to the inability to appreciate the value of human life on all sides. And I think because this is a worldwide issue, I think it requires worldwide solutions. And woe to those who have seen it in their own interests to weaken and to disarm and to demean the kind of agency that we may need more than ever. There's no question that the United Nations, when it was created in 1948, was in direct response to the use of atomic weapons in World War II. Only one nation has used them, and we know basically which nation that was. But the fact of the matter is, the creation of the United Nations and the creation of the Declaration on Human Rights, all of it stemmed from the horrors of World War II, be it the Holocaust, be it the situation in dropping the atomic bombs in Japan, whatever the issues were that you would focus on. The fact of the matter is the creation of the United States was originally envisioned as a way to deal with and address and make sure this kind of thing did not escalate, but in effect was contained. And to demean an agency that was created for that purpose, I think, can backfire on anyone, and I think we're experiencing that right now. So anyway, that's just a thought that I have. If you are inclined to sound off on that particular issue, I'd be more than happy to hear from you. Again, our phone number is area code 304-663-HORN, 4676. Another thing another issue that I had kind of flagged, and this is for future reference, but I think it's interesting. It was in our local paper here, the West Virginia, the Charleston Gazette, which is the statewide newspaper here. And it's about the latest, this is dated the 9th of December, so it's a week old now. But West Virginia is reeling under the results of yet the latest example of what is interpreted as educational failure, which is the decline in test scores. And in early December, West Virginia was confronted with yet another disappointing year of test scores. Standardized test scores for West Virginia have gotten worse. 58% of students in grades 3, 8, and 11 failed to hit the proficiency mark in math in the 2013-2014 school year, compared to 55% the year before. So we declined by 3%. All the efforts, all the money, all the attention on improving our educational experiences and test scores in math went down 3 percentage points here in West Virginia. In reading, 53% of West Virginia youngsters failed to score proficient, compared to 51% the year before. So in reading, we declined by 2%. And of course, as the article points out, there are all of these extenuating circumstances. One of them, for example, here in West Virginia, is that many people expected the scores would drop because the state raised the score that qualifies as proficient. So obviously, if you raise the bar, then the results are going to show. However, with the amount of attention and the amount of emphasis and financial investment that we have in our educational establishment, not only here in this state, but in every other state, it seems to me that we can quibble all we want about 1 point to 2 points one way or the other. The fact of the matter is we ought to be making substantial progress, not just 1 or 2 percentage points, but extensive improvement, and we are not, which obviously suggests that we really haven't zeroed in on the real issues that are going to make a difference. I think we've been talking about those here on the Virtual Center off and on for some times. Second, this was the first year that West Virginia students took the test on computers. And of course that raised its own set of issues. And of course, the other thing is the increase in standards. And the implication is that with the introduction here in West Virginia of the Common Core standards next year, it is very likely that scores will continue to decline next year. So again, I think I'm struck by this. I'm pained by it, to be honest with you, because what it suggests, if you use statistics in the way that they make the most sense, that they really mean something, which is as a barometer of whether you're heading in the right direction or the wrong direction, the fact of the matter is we have yet to head in the right direction. We know that if you lower standards, scores will go up. If you raise standards, scores will go down. That makes perfect sense. But the fact of the matter is, if you are engaging children in an educational experience that really seems to have a payoff for them, then you would experience a dramatic increase in test scores. We haven't seen that yet. I would suggest to you that's one of the things that I see as a possibility, not a reality, as a long-range possibility in the Common Core, which we've talked about before, and I'm sure we'll talk about again. But again, I really think that particular issue is significant. A third issue, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time today on this one. I received an email from a listener, a very, very dedicated listener, and what it was a link. And this link was to a blog which was a position paper on the Constitution and on the founders. And the intent of the piece was to initiate response. In other words, to get a dialogue going on the founders, on the Constitution, on the optimum role for government, what role government should play or should not play in contemporary society. The goal here is conversation. And I thought that alone made the piece worthwhile, because that's what we're about here at the Virtual Center, is conversation and exchange of views about the founders, about the mission of the nation, about the nature of the republic, about the role of educated citizens within a republic, and on and on and on. All the issues that we spent so much of our time here at the Virtual Center, and issues which we will continue to address in the future, God willing. But in the course of this piece, the author, and I don't have a name for the author, took it upon himself or herself, as the case may be, to address the preamble to the Constitution. more specifically to break down the preamble into its constituent parts, and to address each part as it had meaning to the author. In other words, this is what I see this particular phrase or this particular clause of the preamble to the Constitution being about. And I looked at it and I read the piece, and I went back and I looked at the overall theme again, the overall idea, and then I reread the piece. And what I came away with was an appreciation for the importance of the issue. Because the irony is, in 21 months that we've been here at the Virtual Center, we have yet to deal constructively with the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. What the framers really believed they were doing when they released the Constitution of the United States to the general public for ratification by the states. Excuse me for a moment. What exactly does it mean when the framers opened the Constitution with a statement that we the people, in order to do or accomplish certain things, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States? That's the goal. That's the mission. That's what this whole thing is about. And it seems to me very, very worthwhile exercise to address the preamble. So I thought that one of the things we might do today in our abbreviated program, we're moving rapidly towards the top of the hour here. I don't think we need to worry about a 5-minute break today. We have an abbreviated program to begin with. But one of the things I would like to do today is to adopt this theme, namely look, for a moment at least, at the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. One of the things that I found deficient in the blog, in the website that contained this particular idea, was the fact that the author addressed each of the specific goals of the Constitution, which we'll get into in a moment, but made nothing of the opening 3 words to the preamble, which, as we know, are we the people. I really think, obviously, that it is a deficiency to focus on the Constitution and overlook the salutation which opens it, we the people. This is not a constitution that is being given or delivered to the American people on behalf of the states or on behalf of the political leaders of the states or on behalf of the architects who attended the convention and participated in the framing of the document. This document is being released for ratification by the people of the United States in the name of the people of the United States. It defines the essence of republicanism. And therefore it suggests that this is the will of the people. This is fundamental law as articulated by the people of this nation. We, the people of this nation, in order to accomplish the following specific goals, do hereby ordain and establish this particular document, this particular frame of government. The fact that it is ratified by the people in special conventions in each state suggests that philosophically it is grounded in the basis of fundamental law, which means that the framers went back to the origins of political power, which is the people. And so therefore, by definition, fundamental law is law as defined by the people. And what that means is the will of the people expressed in this particular document is to be interpreted as fundamental law, which means that it must always be superior to statute law, to laws passed by legislatures and signed by presidents and reviewed and approved by Supreme Courts. By definition, statute law, as opposed to fundamental law, must assume secondary status. Yet the realities are that statute law is passed by the representatives of the people. When Congress passes a piece of legislation, it is being passed by the elected representatives of the people. So consequently, albeit indirectly, the particular law being passed is the will of the people, as is the Constitution of the United States. So what's the difference? In both cases, it is the people speaking. In one case, through their elected representatives. In the second case, in special conventions of the people called in each state for purposes of ratifying the Constitution. Given that reality of the people speaking in two different venues or two different contexts, how do we determine or make the determination that one is superior to the other? I think, therefore, that the idea of we the people as the first three words to the Constitution of the United States is vitally important in understanding the documents and understanding the document itself, because it basically identifies the document as fundamental law as defined by the ultimate authority, which is the people. And I think that is very, very important to constantly keep in mind. So we the people, in order to accomplish a number of very specific objectives, although they aren't measurable objectives, they are specific. In order to form a more perfect union, that's the first goal, if you will, of the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, comma, ensure domestic tranquility, comma, provide for the common defense, comma, promote the general welfare, comma, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, comma, do hereby ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So the focus of our discussion, then, is on the specific goals articulated in the preamble. But I think an important thing to include in that discussion, which we just did, is we the people. Because that defines where this document came from. The significance and importance of the document is defined by whose will it is, and it is the will of the people. In order to form a more perfect union, well, how do you define a perfect union? Is it possible to even achieve such a thing? But again, the preamble doesn't say to achieve a perfect union. It says in order to form a more perfect union. In other words, maybe the idea of a perfect union is by definition a work in progress. Maybe it's an ultimate that one can never achieve, but everybody seems to know what it involves, and hopefully we all continue to move in the right direction toward achieving it in order to form a more perfect union. In order to establish justice. I think everybody obviously endorses the idea of justice. And again, we can translate justice, define it as fairness, objectivity, not favoring any particular group over any other group, treating everybody the same, assuming that we are a nation of laws, and that under these laws everybody is considered of equal value as a citizen. And the implication here is that justice needs to be the ultimate goal. Along with creating a more perfect union, the establishment of justice would seem to be a worthy goal, as is ensuring domestic tranquility, peace and stability, order, security, creating an environment where people feel secure and safe. Let's just stop there for a moment. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Is there any common thread that connects these three objectives? Forming a more perfect union, establishing justice, and ensuring domestic tranquility. It seems to me, and again, this is our conversation, our continuing conversation, so I apologize for that, but again, I invite you to participate and to call and to share your thoughts and your ideas on this. But it seems to me that the one theme that seems to connect all three of these objectives is government. More specifically, an active government. Obviously, we the people believe that domestic tranquility doesn't just happen. Justice doesn't just happen. Moving toward a more perfect union doesn't just happen. Somebody or something has to help make it happen. And clearly that something is government. Because if we the people are laying out and specifying these particular objectives, then the implication to all of this is that government is the agent of the people. It is government's job to do these things. That's why people are creating the Constitution, we the people. That's what the creation of government is about in the first place, is to move the nation toward a more perfect union. Obviously suggesting, and this is going to be laid out in the document itself that follows, but obviously suggesting that a more perfect union is not one in which all decisions are made by the federal government. Rather, it is one in which decisions in many specific areas are made by local governments, state governments, municipal governments. And that some mechanism has to be created whereby these various agencies of government at all levels must work together, must be moving the nation in the same direction. And so the implication is that what we call federalism, the division of government into national and state at the same time, the optimum relationships between those forms of those elements of government constitutes the more perfect union. And at this time, of course, the Constitution doesn't have a Bill of Rights. Most of the states do. So the implication is that the rights of citizens are trusted to be protected by local government, by the state governments. And until the Bill of Rights is added, that's the way that the majority of the framers wanted to go. So again, forming a more perfect union, establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, and providing for the common defense obviously suggests military. The idea of a military capability. We know historically that the framers, the founders, in 1776 were very, very suspicious of standing armies. It was the British standing army in the colonies as much as anything else that precipitated the movement toward independence. And so the fact that providing for the common defense was one of the major objectives of the Constitution of the United States, and it was drafted at a time when people were very uncomfortable and very suspicious of standing armies. The implication is that the defense of the nation was to be provided by armed citizens, militias, which I think spells out pretty clearly where the idea of the Second Amendment came from. The idea that when the defense of the nation is at issue, it is expected that local militias, citizen armies, will spring to the defense of the nation. And I would suggest that the willingness of citizens to do that constitutes one of the ingredients of the more perfect union. Because if citizens were unwilling to do that, then the union would be far from perfect. And then finally, so what do we have so far besides we the people? We've got 4 objectives: forming a more perfect union, establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, and providing for the common defense. And then comes number 5. And number 5 is the one that gets a lot of the attention, a lot of the controversy. And that is promote the general welfare. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. If we can't define precisely what a more perfect union is, how in heaven's name do we describe or define the general welfare? What does that mean? Does it mean that there is a perfect state which is best for everybody? Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, talked about something called the general will. The general will was based on the assumption that there is a best that when faced with a number of options or decisions to be made, choices, there's one that is the right one. If every citizen could be polled, every citizen could be consulted, and every citizen could be encouraged to set aside or disregard self-interest totally. If every citizen could look at the best interest of the nation and its people, all of its people, the assumption is, this is Rousseau's general will, the assumption is that there is something called a general will. There is a best, a right thing to do. in every situation. And Rousseau's idea is that the purpose of government is to find out what that is and to implement it. That is the ideal reciprocal relationship between government and the people. When government carries out the will of the people as it would be expressed if it was possible to poll all the people and ask them the question devoid of their own self-interest. So the idea of a general welfare, promote the general welfare, seems to imply that there is a general welfare. So the next question is, this is what makes it so controversial. The next question is, how do you define it? How do you know what it is? You can't poll all the people. You can't eliminate self-interest. Madison says that factions are sown in the nature of man. And if you combine liberty, free people, and self-interest, then by definition you have factions. You have people who are willing and able to organize and to join with others to promote the common interest as this group or this faction defines it. That's not the general will. That's the self-interest of a particular constituency. So the general will, and if you assume that the general welfare and the general will mean essentially the same thing, then the implication is that government's job is to promote the best interests of everybody, not the strongest, not those that are best armed, not those that are best educated, not those that are the wealthiest, not those who are the richest, not those who are the whitest, not those who are the tallest, or the shortest, or the heaviest, or the lightest, not those who are male only, everybody. So we come back to the question, how do you define it? How do you define the general welfare? Obviously, majority rule can't define it, because majority rule by definition is faction. It's driven by self-interest. The alternative is consensus. Perfect consensus. Is that what the general welfare means? I think it probably does. I think the meaning of general welfare is the idea that somehow, somewhere, there is a consensus. There is something that everybody would agree is the best for everybody, if they had the opportunity to do it, and if they could experience the kind of conditions which would permit them to do it. then it would be possible to define the general welfare. But in the absence of that, are we left with the reality that the general welfare is whatever government says it is? Because if we assume that government's job is to promote the general welfare, then we have to assume from that whatever government does is government's sense as to what the general welfare requires. And the one thing that the founders tried to emphasize was that by definition, in Republican government, in a republic, self-interest and the public interest, the general welfare, are not necessarily synonymous. In fact, they are contradictory to each other. When self-interest reigns, the public interest is forfeited. When the public interest is given priority, self-interest is forced to recede into the background, or go on the back burner, or whatever expression or phrase you wanted to use to explain it. So in a sense then, government's job is to promote the general welfare, which means government's principal job is to explain to the people why what it does is in the context of promoting the general welfare, why this is the public interest and not private interest. But then again, we are confronted with the reality, and Madison and Hamilton especially featured this in the Federalist Papers, because both Madison and Hamilton speak more than once to the idea of finding people who are willing to put the public interest ahead of their own private interest. That's what makes a republic workable. If you can't find people who are willing to suspend their own self-interest in deference to the public interest, then republicanism can't work. Madison talks in Federalist number 10 about our most considerate and virtuous citizens, whose wisdom and lust and love for justice takes precedence over their own private self-interest. But if factions are sown in the nature of man, where do you find these people? If, by definition, everybody is driven by self-interest, then how or where are you going to find people who are willing to suspend that self-interest in deference to the public interest? Are we confronted with a basic contradiction in Madison's philosophical reasoning? Is Madison contradicting himself? Well, if you read the Federalist Papers carefully, it seems that Madison believed that you could go through various screenings of people, and the more screenings you went through, the more you tended towards finding people whose priority was the public interest. It's almost as if Madison is talking about filtration. That if you take a number of people, a number of public servants, and you put them in a colander, and you shake that colander, the only ones that are going to fall through the screen are going to be the least self-interested and the most public interested. The idea is that the colander is going to filter out those who are driven by self-interest. And then if you take that group that makes it through the colander, and then you find another colander where the holes are smaller, and you put that second group in there, and you shake the colander again, then the only ones who are going to come through are going to be the best public servants. In other words, by periodic filtering of public servants, Madison seems to believe that you can eventually get to people whose willingness to put the public interest is foremost. These are your public servants. And if you read the literature of the 18th century, and I'm thinking specifically here of Gordon Wood's monumental creation of the American Republic, and the way Gordon Wood treats the issue of republicanism, Gordon Wood is driven by the idea that the republic that the founders created was a republic that was totally dependent on civic virtue, on the fact that those people who classified or labeled themselves public servants were really willing to suspend self-interest on behalf of the public interest. And that's what Madison talks about with the separation of powers and the checks and balances system within the Constitution itself. That each of those ingredients, if you will, constitutes a filter, a colander. And the ideal is that if you run the definition of the public interest through all of those filters, you will eventually end up with something resembling or approaching the general welfare or the public interest, or as Rousseau called it, the general will. It's idealistic. It's probably naive. But the fact of the matter is, if you read Madison carefully, you begin to pick up a sense that he really believes that this process is possible. And that we can actually achieve it. Which we have to try to achieve, because that's the system that we the people have dictated through the Constitution that they want. That constitutes what the people have defined as fundamental law. And finally, there's one additional objective in the preamble. And that is to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to those who come after us, future generations, as it were. The implication being, then, that liberty, individual liberty, is the product of these other stages or objectives or goals or whatever you want to call it. There are a couple of implications here which I think are incredibly important. Every one of these objectives to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. Every one of those things requires some sort of action. None of them are outcomes that occur by themselves, that happen without effort, that happen without some sort of activity. The implication is that it's government that initiates those activities. It is government that we look to, that we the people look to move us in the direction of a more perfect union, to move us in the direction of something closer to what we might call true justice. The idea of a nation of ruled by law. We are a nation under law. Ensuring domestic tranquility involves much more than putting down insurrections. It obviously involves creating the kind of circumstances which are not conducive to insurrections in the first place. Ensuring domestic tranquility seems to suggest government operating in a way or in an environment which minimizes people's sense of need or felt need to revolt or to take action. If people really are being treated fairly, if people really believe that this system is committed to justice for all, if people truly believe that government is moving us towards a more perfect union, if people genuinely believe that they are the nation's defense. And they are willing to come to the nation's defense when called upon by government to do so. They're not going to do it if we're not moving toward a more perfect union. They're not going to do it if they believe that society does not treat people justly. They are not going to do it if they believe that government operates in ways which are so unfair that government is spending an inordinate amount of its time putting down insurrections because we live in an environment which seems to suggest that insurrections are the rule rather than the exception. If people believe all of these things, then people are much more willing to commit to the common defense. If people believe that government is really striving to promote the general welfare, if people believe that government is not favoring certain groups over other groups, if government believes that everybody is being treated fairly under a nation ruled by law, and that government, for all practical purposes, is doing everything it can to really define accurately and carry out the general welfare, then by definition, citizens in this nation will be able to secure the blessings of liberty to themselves and to those that come after them. But clearly, liberty exists principally because of the efforts of government. Liberty does not exist without government. People who seek to argue that personal liberty, the blessings of liberty, are to be achieved by disabling or dismantling government, by weakening it, by underfunding it, by resisting it, by attacking it, by demeaning it. I would suggest to you that that definition of liberty is what John Winthrop called natural liberty. Man's right to do whatever he lists. Because man's natural freedom, natural inclination, is to pursue his own self-interest, not the public interest. So by definition, man without government is not free. Because without government, we are not moving toward a more perfect union. We are not operating in an environment dictated by fundamental law, by the rule of law. We are not living in an environment which discourages domestic insurrection. On the contrary, we are living in an environment which promotes it. We are not living in an environment where people will come to the defense of their nation when it is threatened. Consequently, government feels the need to maintain its own private army rather than call upon its own citizens. It is not an accident that the Constitution of the United States establishes civil control over the military. What I am suggesting is that securing the blessings of liberty cannot be achieved at the expense of government, but rather can exist only as a result of the efforts of government. Beyond that, I am suggesting that those who argue the contrary to that, those who argue that big government is destroying my freedom, are flying in the face of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. They are flying in the face of the will of the framers. They are not upholding the will of the framers. They are contradicting the will of the framers. But wait, what about Adam Smith? What about the free market and freedom, economic freedom? I would suggest to you that inherent in all of this is a misreading of Adam Smith as well. We know here at the Virtual Center that Adam Smith was one of the Scottish philosophers. He was of that school. He believed in something that Ronald Reagan referred to as the miracle of the market. He believed that the miracle of the market created prices that were fair, made it possible to achieve a balance between demand and supply. He referred to it as the invisible hand. Almost by magic, a market, a free market, would set the optimum price and satisfy demand at the same time, automatically. But he was not talking about corporations who set out to monopolize the industry. Today, in America today, in this holiday season, we are experiencing some of the lowest gasoline prices in years. In this morning's market, oil was selling at $54 a barrel and change, which is less than half of what oil was selling for 6-7 months ago. The media is telling us that this is like a Christmas present for consumers in this country because now we're able to buy gasoline at prices which are putting additional money, spending money in people's pockets. In theory, it's going to inflame the market. It's going to make for a more productive Christmas. It's going to give people additional capital that they can spend. But wait a minute. Airlines, which for years have been telling us that their increased cost and the additional fees that they have had to add was principally being driven by the escalating price of fuel. Airlines have not dropped their ticket 1 cent. Why aren't airlines lowering ticket prices in response to the reduced cost of gasoline? I guess the only answer that I can come up with there is they're not doing that because they don't have to. They continue to readjust and retool airplanes to jam more seats, take away additional legroom, put more people on flights, streamline the number of flights possible in order to maximize the number of occupied seats on every flight. Those of us who are beyond middle age can remember when going on an airline flight, flying somewhere, was an experience to be looked forward to. Now it's one to be dreaded. At what many of us believe are unbelievable costs, we are being herded. We are being treated like cattle. We are being abused and mistreated and demeaned. At the same time that we're paying increased costs for a ticket. If you have sat in an airline terminal, as I have, and you are there when your flight begins boarding, you know that the first thing airlines do is welcome aboard their premium passengers, whether they're called gold ticket holders or whether they're called diamond holders or whatever. It used to be that there were two groups who flew: coach and first class. But now there's more than first class. There are those willing to pay to be seated first. And suddenly you sit there and you realize that in spite of the fact that you probably had to scrimp and save, maybe borrow from your savings, in order to purchase the ticket, you are, figuratively speaking, at the back of the bus. You are so low on the totem pole established by the airline that you're almost embarrassed to be there. Why is it that you didn't get a break on ticket price? Because the gasoline, because the oil market is so low. Well, one of the answers is that now what used to be 8 to 10 different competing airlines who were competing for your business now have morphed into 4. There are 4 major airlines in the United States that fly more than 80% of the passengers. And how did they get to this point? How did they secure the monopoly over the industry that they have by attacking government regulation, by working against the idea of competition, by contradicting and going directly against the opinions of Adam Smith. But wait a minute, we have to have monopolies in order to compete successfully in a global market. And so suddenly, what we've allowed to happen is that we have allowed so-called free market advocates to suspend the ingredients of the free market in order to better organize ourselves for the competition of the world market, which, interestingly enough, we control. So these people are committed to Adam Smith, but they're really not committed to Adam Smith. Because if they were, they would encourage competition. They would discourage monopoly. They would truly live according to the dictates of the free market. It seems that they speak out of two sides of their mouth at the same time. And their number one objective is to disable government in the interests of freedom, in the interests of liberty. Now it's liberty in a different environment. It's a global environment. But suddenly government regulation and government activity and government control would inhibit the ability of these organizations to compete globally. So their goal is to render government innate, to render government unable to function. As Grover Norquist explained it some years ago, to starve the beast in order to promote liberty. But in our Constitution, in our fundamental law, the framers and the people who ratified the work of the framers in the preamble to the Constitution have identified a set of objectives which require an active, vibrant, vigilant government, and have suggested that if government successfully pursues all of the first 5 or 6 objectives articulated in the preamble, then it would really be possible for people to secure the blessings of liberty to themselves and their posterity. But the fact of the matter is, what we realize is that most of us are not experiencing the blessings of liberty. And we don't know who to turn to fix it. Clearly, a few people are experiencing the blessings of liberty as provided by government, but at the expense of the many. The numbers tell us that we are living in one of the most unequal societies in the history of the world. While the stock market has been declining in recent weeks and days primarily because of the issue of oil, the decline in the price of oil, the fact of the matter is the market is still over 17,000, the Dow. it has gone up incredibly over the last couple of years. But if you read carefully, it's very obvious that the infamous 1% is experiencing the vast majority of all of this growth. Most of the rest of us have been encouraged to take care of our retirement by locking in the kind of annuity which is going to guarantee us a life income. We have reached the end of our program today, and I'd lost track of time, and I'm sorry. It's 3 p.m., and we really need to move out of here. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center. We'll be back tomorrow at our regular time. Thank you for listening. Be safe, and thank you.